This is as unexpected for me as it is for you. I was told about 5 minutes, well, 10 minutes ago actually, 5 to get over it and 5 to think about what I was going to say. But I'll get comfy first. Oh my lord, what a weird chair. Thank you, Victoria. Thanks for giving me this slot. Thank you all for being here, and feel free to look at your programs as I spin around uncontrollably. Okay, I'm going to have to put my feet down. That's not going to work, is it? Sweet. Thank you, my friend. So, yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's better. I don't have a speech plan or a talk plan, but I definitely have things I'd love to share. And so if you're willing to stick with me, we'll go through some stuff. And I don't know what will come out, but hopefully at the end of it, there'll be a space also for some questions. So let's see what flows. Some of you may have seen the film that I made yesterday, and I thought perhaps I would give a little bit of background to that, and then also some of my thoughts about what it means to me, and what it means for us all in the future. And at the same time, for those of you who didn't see the film, which I'm guessing is quite a few of you, making sure that I put it in a context that is understandable for those. So. Well, you know, I started out life pretty much in an institutional part of society. I came from a military family, very Christian. I joined the Royal Marines at the age of 18. I went to public school. That was me. I remember a girlfriend, when I left, asking me, you know, why you stood to attention in front of the television because the national anthem's on. I mean, I was that guy. So you can see that I've been on something of a journey. I don't do that anymore, as it happens, in case you were curious. I started out very much in a linear mind. I started out very much in a place of just believing what's been offered me from society and believing it very strongly. And then luckily had some amazing girlfriends that took me on a journey away from that. So much so that by the time I got to make my first TV series, Tribe, I had gone through such a transition that I was fully aware that, you know, my life had already been turned upside down on a couple of occasions. So by the time I came to do that, I realized, don't go in there with judgments because you could be wrong. You know, I had clearly been very wrong before. And so that kind of set the scene for the way that I made the first big TV series that I made about Indigenous people, which was just to go there and be with them and listen and learn, as I had done previously and had my life opened previously and within my own society. So it just made sense that would be the obvious thing to do within these other societies. And as everyone in this room knows, the more you travel, the more you listen. If you truly listen, if you're truly in their space and you're having to be in their space because they're providing, and therefore you have to really open up to what it is they have to say, no matter how weird or against what your background might suggest, as it was often the case. I was confronted by some quite difficult stuff, as well as all the beauty and the amazement and the wonderful stuff. There was difficult stuff, but trying to understand where that was coming from, clearly, as all of us know, allows you to reflect. And so often, because I genuinely believe we all come from, as everyone here believes, no doubt, we all come from the same space. We all come into this world as a positive being, seeking harmony. Why is it that we're all perceiving the world in these different ways? And some of these cultures I live with who had very different ways of perceiving the world, very different ways of behaving in the world, allowed me to reflect on my own society, allowed me to reflect on my own way of being. And that clearly unlocked loads of doors as I went further on that journey. And made me question where I'd come from. Made me question the way this society is operating and what have you. And I did that for a number of years, literally living with Indigenous peoples all around the world, and I could have sat at any dinner table and talked forever about indigenous wisdom and tribal life and human nature. I was waxing lyrical, thinking I had all this information. And then suddenly, the last group I ever lived with in the making of the series Tribe, after like 20 episodes, 20 different groups that I lived with, was a group that totally made me wake up and go, oh my God, everything I thought I knew is not relevant here. This is a totally different way of being. And it really got me thinking. And that's essentially the basis of the film that some of you saw last night. It was so different. It was like there's this group, and then there's everyone else, including all the other tribes I've lived with, and France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Japan. I mean, like all the rest of us, and this. And it took me a long time to be able to even say that in public. So not being a trained anthropologist, realizing how weird or romantic or whatever that is, and just going, I'm experiencing something so deep and profound here, and yet I can't put it into words, and I don't have the courage or capacity to be able to explain what this is, because it feels so at odds with making difference. But there was something, and it took me a long time to figure out what that was. And essentially that group was the only group that I lived with who were pre-agricultural in a sense. They were living in a way uninfluenced by the dawn of agriculture, the domestication of plants and animals for food. So they were hunter-gatherers who were still nomadic, living in the forest. But that wasn't it. I mean, I could easily, that's fine. I could figure out they had this sharing culture. It was all very logical and understandable why they shared. You know, it's in their interest to share, because you can't carry food, you can't store it, you can't dry it, so you share it out. You don't know who's going to get it. All this stuff, that was all logical and understandable. I get that. But there was something else. There was something about the way they were behaving, the way they were interacting with each other, something about the way that they felt in their presence. There was a part of me that I couldn't bring to being there, that when I wasn't able to, there's this very, very real part of me that, because there was no purchase for that, something else took its place that was incredibly beautiful and sweet. And I'm very aware of this language that I'm using, being like, you know, come on, Bruce, we got to be careful about how you describe these things. But I just have to say that's how it felt. And the only reason I feel that that's valid for me is because I had all these other experiences. It's not like I'm just going to a group and having a romantic experience of living with an indigenous group, because I've already had that 20 times over. It was this group. It was like, wow, what was it? And so that got me really thinking. Anyway, in the meantime, I went off and did a trip down the Amazon, and that was essentially all about globalization. So I was looking at, you know, logging and soya and beef and gold mining and cocaine, and, you know, we just went to all these different groups to look at essentially what the effect of global trade is doing, and sort of humanizing the people, and showing that they're not the problem. Where's this energy of all this destruction happening? Where's that coming from? And like inviting us to kind of look in the mirror at the way that we consume. That was that series. And then I took 2 years out, because essentially I had become so addicted to this overstimulated lifestyle that I was leading, being like fully like on the crest of a wave the whole time, with all this energy, all this manpower taking me to all these places, and then coming back and living this sort of vibrant, very high octane lifestyle in my home of Ibiza. And so like this extraordinary journey that I was on, and all my learning about simplicity and community and everything in one direction, and all this lifestyle going in another direction, and just being really discombobulated with myself, and this addiction I had to this amazingly stimulated, which was extraordinary, as you can imagine. I mean, what a treat. But I could see it, I could see it from these other perspectives that I had, that it wasn't healthy. So I was like, I've got to stop. I've got to take time out. So I took 2 years out, and did the winters in Ibiza were really beautiful and gentle and sweet. And so I just did that time my own and got a dog and just like chilled out. And that was great. But during that time, all of these things, like what was it about the Panan, kept coming back to me. What was it about all these experiences that I've had? You know, how am I going to integrate all this stuff into my life? How am I going to be able to also be a part of this movement I want to be a part of? But the other thing I noticed was that I'd touched on so many different subjects, and there were so many different people kind of asking me for their help. You know, all of these indigenous groups all had their own, all had problems that they were inviting me to help with, and all of these different things I'd seen in the Amazon, they were just like, it was like, how do I get involved in all of these grassroots organizations that want my attention to help them? And it just became clear, because I'd seen so much from this period of reflection, that actually, yes, it would be lovely to get involved in all these things, because I would continue the connections, and the connections were really important, and that meant that I felt good about being able to help people that I knew and loved. And it was very hard to not do that, but at the end of the day, it felt like that was just putting plasters on something that wasn't really getting to the heart of it. And what was the heart of it? Well, the heart of it is us. We're the heart of it. We are the reason for all these things. And I say we, I don't mean this space, but we as the rich nations, we as those who are part of the globalized trade without really thinking about it. Why is that happening? How do we become more aware? And how do we go about doing this without beating ourselves up? Because we're kind of born into it, but like we're waking up to it now. How are we going to figure this out? How are we going to be soft on ourselves and yet at the same time shift this? So that was the task I set myself. And at the same time, around that time, I remember seeing two things that happened to me. One was I saw that amazing, there's a TED talk by a lady called Gilbert Taylor. Some of you may have seen it. It's it's tens of millions of people watched it. And it's about a lady who has a stroke in the left hemisphere of her brain, and she basically goes into this, she's a brain scientist and has this stroke, and then describes what happens to her from the inside out as a brain scientist as she goes into this like sort of functional breakdown, but at the same time these extraordinary experiences of like melting into the space. And she describes how she couldn't tell the difference between the molecules of her hand and the molecules of everything around her. I'm like, oh my God, I've had that shit. I've had that experience with the tribes doing ayahuasca, with the tribes doing iboga, where I'd always just put it in a box and gone, oh, that's just a trip, you know, that doesn't mean anything. But here's a brain scientist describing an experience that I've had in a really, really interesting way about interconnection, about perception that resonated. And I was like, wow, okay, so the scientists out there talking about these like very sort of non-material experiences, and that was interesting to me. So these are the reasons why I kind of combined these things in the film. For those of you who saw it, we end up using this guy called Ian McGilchrist, who talks about perception. But anyway, so I then went off to the Arctic and did a series about climate change, and that was more about living again with indigenous peoples in this various parts of the world. And the subtext of that one was, okay, so we've seen globalization, we've seen what our trade is doing in the world, but here is a reflection on it doesn't matter where it is, it's going to come back to us, you know, because like climate change is climate change, and like they're not the ones who are affecting it, we're affecting it, but this is going to be a global thing. So that was the subtext. It was very subtle. I wanted to make it more overt, but that's quite a challenge making 9 o'clock shows. You know, there's so much I can say and there's so much I can't, and that was a frustration, but it was real and I understood it at the time. So I ended up deciding to leave the Beeb and go on my own journey to tell my own story and go a bit deeper into these things that I'd learned. And at the heart of it was this understanding that was growing about connection to nature. But the Panan offering this insight into how a society can be formed through a different perception of reality. And what suddenly came to me during the course of making this film, meeting all these amazing scientists that I'd met and all the rest of it, was that actually the sort of theory sort of arrived in my mind. It's like, well, you go hunting with these dudes, that's a meditation. They're meditating, you know. And I forgot to mention to you, in that 2 years off, not only seeing this lady who had the stroke and feeling this, I'd had friends, because I was like literally going a bit mad with this stimulation overload, and they were like mates who said to me, Bruce, you've got to go and do a meditation retreat. And I'm like, oh, shut up, you know, I'm not into that, whatever. And in the end, I got dragged off to do it just to prove them wrong. It's like, you know, it's not going to do it. Yeah, I mean, really, it was. It's like, I'm just going to shut you up because, like, it's not. And then it absolutely blew my mind and changed my life. Funny old thing. And in case you haven't known, in your own lives. And wow, what a gift, you know. And so all of these things were happening in my time off, in my own personal development. And I went through a process. I gave up sex and drugs and alcohol and everything for about 3 years. And so I went deep into a process of self-development, personal work, and all that sort of stuff. And in the meantime, putting this film together. And so when I wanted to go back to visit the Penang, the question was, okay, so here was a group who were flowing with nature, but the other thing about them wasn't just their sharing culture, but their sense of identity, their sense of who they were in relation to each other and the forest felt very different. And they have no hierarchy. This is a time before shamans. This is a time before leaders. This is a group, and there are a few others like them, I since learned, who exist in this way that are extraordinarily different in that they really genuinely don't see themselves as different to each other. And that sounds weird. It's like, well, I wouldn't want that. But I genuinely believe that when I'm with this group, that their deepest desire of what they want in the world, their deepest desire of how they want to be and what brings them joy at the deepest level isn't an individual desire. You know, you take any one of those people to one side and say, what do you want? What do you want? And they're like, I just want this thing, this group in this place to carry on going forever. That's what they want. I don't, if I have to go over there and do that thing, and that means I'm off to, and that has an impact on this, I don't want that. And I'm like, that is big. And they don't let anyone get bigger than their boots. So if anyone starts showing off that they're the better hunter, or if anyone tries to say that they're the leader or anything like that, the rest of them just totally work away to not allow that happen. They'll like remove his weapon, not cook his food, whatever it is. You know, they just know that that's not going to work, and so they're constantly working at it. But with the Penang, I mean, I've been with other groups since who exhibit like this type of behavior, and you know, and then I've spent a lot of time with this amazing anthropologist couple, Jerome and Ingrid Lewis, who were in the film as well, who gave me so much more gravitas to all this. And they're like, no, Bruce, this is egalitarianism, is our way for 95% of our time on the planet. This is where we came out of Africa and went around the tropical belt, through the tropics, down through Southeast Asia. This is how we were. And I'm like, yeah, but what about all those archaeological digs, finding skulls crushed and all the rest of it? It's like, no, promise you. There's a lot of people talking about that, but there's just as many with just as much evidence saying this other thing. And when you experience it, like I have with these people, you're like, if there's a debate, that shit feels real to me, and that's my experience too. Oh my God. And I'm the guy that lived with tribes all over the world, and I've been all these things, and I had no idea. I just thought we were all chiefs and shamans, and it's always been that, ever been thus. It's like, oh my God, this is our true ancestral heritage. No ownership. Everyone understanding that the best way for us all to be together is to be equal. And like really living it, and like having lived it forever, and working at it on a daily basis to keep that shit going. And all that shifted when we moved out the tropical belt into seasonality. You have to start collecting, you have to start accumulating to get through this winters. Who gets to design or devise out how to divide up the goods? And that's kind of perhaps where hierarchy and all the rest of it seeped in. And that's a long story I won't go into. But all I know is that when I've lived with these one or two groups who have this, the way that they have about them is that it feels like the thing I was saying earlier, like there's a part of myself that can't fit, it has nothing to latch onto, is because they don't exude competition. And it doesn't mean that they don't have competition in their hearts, but they've just worked on a daily basis for so long, they just know that it just doesn't work for them. So when I'm with them, even my sort of witty banter has competition at the heart of it. Who's funnier? Who's cooler? Who's like, and they're just like, that just doesn't fit. They're just like, ugh, something else, you know? Like it, and again, I'm like, oh my God, Bruce, you can't understand how romantic you sound, how extraordinarily that shit, you can't say that. And it's like I said, it's taken me a long time to be able to sit in this space and say these things, but genuinely, That's my experience, and now I know that there's academics who are backing it up, and it's like that stuff needs to be expressed, because I had no idea, and it's really, really, really interesting and powerful and inspiring. So, I mean, another example, I was with a group in Africa, you know, and we were dancing around, and the men, like, all hanging out and, like, showing off masculinity and, like, flexing muscles and grunting, and we were all having a really good time. And then someone brings out this big long stick, and we all gather either side of the stick, you know, and it's like, and the girls are around, and we're kind of showing off. And everywhere I know, normally, it would just be like one group one side, and then the others the other side, and we would just start a little impromptu tug of war. It'd just be great fun. I mean, we all do that. But no, they just that didn't even enter their space. It was like we were all pushing and pulling, but no one was more than anyone else. So we were all up and down and in and out. It was just those subtle types of moments when they sing their polyphonic singing, like we heard at the beginning of the opening here. You know, it's all about listening to the other. It's all about you sing your bit, but you're actually fully aware of the other. And the other thing that I noticed was interesting was that because they're meditating every day when they're hunting, which of course you don't need to do when you're farming. You don't need to be in your senses and aware in the same way. Now, that doesn't mean to say that there aren't many, many beautiful farmers who are fully connected and in their hearts and fully empathic connection to that which is around them. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that you don't need to be. But you do need to be when you're hunting. You won't ever actually get your food if that's the way you won't survive if you're not really fully in your presence. So maybe in time, this move away from being present, from being in our senses, from being very, very alert into another state has had an imbalance in the way that our inner world works. And that's why I brought in this brain scientist who talks about the left and the right hemisphere, because of course meditation, well, not of course, but what I learned, meditation much more right, and then this other way of experiencing the world much more left, and that actually plays out in how we perceive ourselves as separate. Whereas when you're more in the right, when you're more in the meditative state, anyone who's done a Vipassana or any week-long retreat, you come out and you feel part of something wider than you. You feel empathy. You feel an empathic connection to that which is around. And they not only have that amongst each other, but they have it with their environment too, which I think is also something that needs to be brought into a lot of these spiritual practices. Like, there's still quite a lot of them very human-centric, but that stuff is like, no, it's also nature. And that's the bit of the investigation that I thought was important to bring in. It's like empathy for that too. And so when these tribes are there and they say, all I want is to just continue this thing going forwards, it's because they feel it. They know that they are going to be looked after when they get old by the people that they love, who they looked after as they were growing up. They know that in that moment of death, they don't care about being famous or being remembered, because they know that they're going to go into the ground, they're going to feed the tree that's going to give the fruit that's going to be for the next generation, and that's enough for them. They are happy that their contribution to this thing going forwards forever is a remembering in its own right. And our world of individualism, where we're all searching for fame or power or whatever it is, it's like it's a symptom perhaps of experiencing the world in a different way. They're empathically connected, and we're perhaps experiencing the world in a much more separate way. And I just thought that these sort of elements coming together, complex as they are, and I know that my speech has been a little bit disjointed, but we tried, because we had a lot more time, to put that together into a film. And I just thought, you know, I mean, there was so many other things as well that we wanted to talk about. You know, we went off and filmed ayahuasca, we went to Africa to film this other group and stuff. In the end, we took them all out and just left it as like, okay, here's a good enough message that at one time we lived as equals, and that we all know inside is how we operate best, is how we feel best. And yeah, it's work. We've got to work at it. And yeah, how to apply that information to this world of ownership and power and hierarchy that we have today is going to be an interesting journey. And the sequel is going to go into that more, about how we operate on others, how societies, like the role of the women, that's all coming later. But I thought I'd need to stop with we've first of all got to start feeling empathic connection to the world again. We've got to fall in love with nature again. We've got to fall in love with each other, not just our family and friends, but like we've got to just break down these barriers and look beyond and feel it. And yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. Feeling the pain that we're causing the planet, feeling the pain that we're causing refugees, feeling the pain that we're causing all these groups of people. It's hard. That's why we're in such denial. We don't want to look at ourselves. We're so wrapped up with just keeping stimulated because we can't bear to actually be with the truth of what we're doing and the way that our society is existing in the world. It's painful, but until we wake up to that pain, we're not going to change. So learning that there are tools that societies have created over the eons. We call them spiritual practices. Don't apply them to humans, but just these spiritual practices, meditation, yoga, poetry, dance, ritual, where these things will help us to reconnect to ourselves and then perhaps reconnect to the world around us. And that, I felt, was a message to start out on, at least. I'm guessing there's no time for questions, or maybe one or two. Okay, let's come on.
Connection, great connection to nature. And for us over here, we've all come here to hear you speak, and it's around the ecocide message is about we're destroying nature. And underneath that, for us, and me personally, is this enormous well of grief. So somehow when you say we need to have a look at the pain, how do we do that? How do we deal with this pain that we're carrying?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I think it's really understandable that we don't want to, because it's so big, you know. But I think we just have to learn to love each other and forgive ourselves. You know, we're born into this. No, we didn't wake up and go, I'm going to destroy the planet. You know, this is and that's why I think the understanding the journey of how we got here is a part of the story. That's why I was happy to share that tiny piece of the jigsaw, because it's a long story. It's like the 10, 12, 15,000 years, who knows? We've been on this journey of separation. And at the same time, so this reminds me of something I wanted to say. It's like, I don't think it's about turning back the clock. We can't all go back and be hunter-gatherers again. Well, maybe we could, and maybe that would be great, but I don't think it's necessary. I think it is about reintegrating. And of course, this journey of separation we've been on has brought about so many wonderful things that we enjoy today. We'd be lying if we said we didn't. But we have to reintegrate that into a wisdom. But as far as the grief is concerned, forgiving ourselves is a big part of it, but not stepping away from it, not avoiding it, knowing that it's actually at the heart of it. We will be happier when we go on this journey. We will be happier when we start reconnecting. So much of the stories that we tell ourselves is you'll be happy with more stuff, more fame, more money, whatever. We all know, everyone in this tent knows that that's a fallacy, and yet we still kind of live it so much. And our whole society kind of forces that. But at the heart of it, and many, many people here I've had conversations with over the weekend, they're like talking community, they're talking reconnection, all the rest of it. But like these things we're doing, not because we're like altruists that have to, it's like because actually it makes us happier. And I think that what's good for us and what we desire aren't always the same thing. We know that, you know, we all know that in so many aspects of our life. But, you know, we're waking up to the fact that we were in the sweetie shop and we've gorged the shit out of ourselves and we're feeling pretty unhealthy. And time to get out of the sweetie shop, you know. And like everyone in society is going to be better off for this. Like whether you're at the top or the bottom, we're all going to be better off. The top are so isolated and lonely in their castles, and then the bottom is like under the cosh, and we're all better off. But it's a painful journey because you have to go back into seeing yourself, have to go back into rubbing up against each other. You know, money's a great thing to go, I don't need to deal with you, I'll just find someone else. And that means we're not looking at our stuff because no one's forcing us to. But actually, looking at your stuff is what we have to do. And so this whole healing journey that we're all going to go on together, which I think we have to go on together, It's going to be hard, but we just have to know that through this grief of what's happening, of what we're doing, is such a beautiful space at the end. It's so beautiful, and focus on that. It's like, okay, I know that I love my privacy, I love my free time, I love my big house, I love my fast car, but actually, I love that more. I love my children more. I love this planet more. Deep down, I know that. And even though I don't feel it every day, I kind of know it. So let's just make that our trip, and maybe that will be a way through.
Oh. Bruce Parry, everybody! Showing us his love.